Hi, we are going to be today talking about a little bit about personality type and how it relates to individual children in our classrooms, groups of children in our classrooms, and really how we interact with children themselves based on our own personality. I guess the goal in this really is for everyone to have a better understanding of how to interact with other people, children in particular, so that we can be better early child care providers. So some of you may have heard these terms before, extroversion and introversion. It seems to be kind of a trendy thing to talk about right now. I know these are terms that I throw out a lot when I'm talking, but basically here it's a concept, like it says here, that describes innate preferences for interacting with the world. How do we interact with the world? How do we get our energy? So there's a continuum in extroversion and introversion. Everyone is going to fall somewhere on this continuum. Not if you're an introvert, you're not going to be extreme introverted necessarily. And if you fall more into the extroverted part of this continuum, you're not going to be necessarily very, very strongly extroverted. There is a continuum, though. It is also a genetic disposition and cannot be permanently altered. And so what I mean by this is that it's a product of what we've inherited from our parents. And this does have a significant impact on how we and children interact with other people. All right, so in the first column here, we are talking about extroverts. Like I said a minute ago, extroverts get their energy from being around other people. This would not be me. This would not be me. Now, we are focusing on children, but again, we need to know what category we fall into so that we can know better how to adapt and work with our kids better. But I'm not an extrovert. Being around other people really wears me out. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Extroverts, we'll go ahead and talk about it now. Introverts become exhausted with social interaction, and they really enjoy and feel better after being by themselves. And I do strongly fall into this category. Now, that doesn't mean that I hate being around people or I don't like being around people. It just means that it on a typical day is going to be a very exhausting experience for me if it's out of kind of the ordinary. Being around my colleagues doesn't necessarily wear me out because it's part of my my everyday. But if I have to go to a party or go to a meeting or something like that where I have or a trip where I have to be around people, I'm tired. People I'm not necessarily around a whole lot, it really does wear me out. All right, so extroverts tend to really prefer people and things, and introverts tend to prefer ideas and images. Extroverts are going to feel comfortable in groups and like to work in groups, and this is an important one to remember here. Extroverts feel comfortable in groups and like to work in groups. Introverts have a few very close friends that they know very well. Whereas extroverts have a wide variety of friends. So extroverts do seem to really prefer people here. Extroverts most of the time are going to jump very quickly into new activities, and introverts are going to reflect and they're going to think before really starting a project. Extroverts are described as being outgoing and expressive. Introverts are going to be more introspective. They're going to kind of not keep this to themselves so much, but just not talk about things quite as much. And unfortunately, people a lot of times will see introverts as weak because it's not the more dominant of the two categories here. But we know that statistically, between a third and a half of people are introverts, which means there's a good chance if you're watching this that you are an introvert or that you work with an introvert. This is based on a scale called the Myers-Briggs scale here. It was which is based on a book by Carl Jung, I think. And he said that all of us have a natural inclination towards either of these, and there are other parts of the personality type that we're not going to talk about in this course, but we may in another one, so just so you know. And I think that's really about it for that slide there. Let me look at my notes here. Okay, and I did say a minute ago that whether you tend to be an extrovert or an introvert cannot be permanently altered, and trying to do so on a child can really cause potential damage for the child's mental health. Now, people adapt to different situations, and I don't remember if we talk about that later on in this presentation, but sometimes even if you're a pretty strong introvert, you can put on a show and you can do what you need to do and seem vivacious and lively and all of that. You can fool people sometimes when you need to fool people, but and kids can do it too, but it's not really where we need to stay. And when we push ourselves and when we push kids to stay in a state in which they're not, it can do some damage on their little brains. All right, so why is all of this important here? I think a lot of times we really push kids to be more outgoing and social when it's just not really in their nature. We say, go hug so-and-so, or go play with so-and-so, or why don't you join the group, or, something like that. And it's not necessarily who, part of who they are. We don't, on the other hand, go to extroverts who are, leading a group or being part of a group and say, hey, why don't you go sit by yourself for a few minutes, unless they're causing trouble or something. So we do push kids, and adults, I might add, to be more outgoing and social when it's just not really in their nature, and it's uncomfortable. I remember as a young child, just hating new situations, going into new Sunday school classes, or different situations where I didn't know people, and I survived, and I didn't necessarily have a bad time all the time. It just, the dread of it and just being exhausted when it's over. Knowing about a child's temperament also helps us to understand what different kinds of situations and activity bring out natural talents. When we can understand a person's personality better, and we are primarily talking about introversion and extroversion here, we can cater the way we interact with the child based on this, and we can have a better idea of what their talents are and what we can do as a facilitator, as a teacher in their classroom, to give them the opportunity for these talents to shine here. It's important to be able to understand why a child acts in a particular way. I was in the classroom for several years, and probably a lot of you have been in their classroom way more than I ever was. But I would have, just the wide open kids who just were in the middle of everything and wanted to talk about everything. And I would have the same kids. I would have, different kids, but every day after day after day, they would come in and they would just be extremely slow to warm up, and they would stick by themselves in the classroom, and they weren't lonely. They just were being who they were supposed to be. When we can understand our own temperament, we may be able to understand how we fit or clash with the child's temperament a lot better. Now, one of the activities that I have y'all doing after you finish watching the PowerPoint here is to take a simplified version of the personality, or of an extroversion introversion test, to kind of see where you fall in that continuum. I've got 3 daughters, and they're all social. They all enjoy being around people. But 2 of my 3 daughters, one in particular, really just needs time to herself. Being around people that she's not around, daily, just exhausts her, and she needs to be by herself. My middle daughter falls more into the extroverted category, and she just likes to be out. She likes to always want something to do. She needs to always be out or talking to somebody, or she talks on the phone more than her teenage sister does, because she just craves that social interaction, and just gets a thrill from it. She falls more into this extroversion category. Now, my children are all older than preschool age children, But they were preschool age children at one point in time. And I think that if I had better understood personality and looking at these things, maybe I could have, done things differently for them. So some implications for this is we need to look past stereotypical labels assessing development. A lot of times we may look at lists or what is expected because of what society says, and think something is wrong with a child because they don't fall into a certain box. The child who stands at the door for 20 minutes every morning and kind of looks around to gauge what's going on in the classroom before, he comes in to the classroom, he's not necessarily being shy. He's not being antisocial. He's just trying to figure out what's going on. He's so that he can proceed and have a good time that day. We also need to understand that the U.S. culture, not surprisingly, values extroverted characteristics more than characteristics that should say of introverted people. That was a typo there. So extroverted characteristics are valued more than introverted characteristics. But other cultures many times respect introverted characteristics more. In some cultures, making eye contact is rude. So we really do need to understand cultural traits. In the United States and probably many Western countries, there's definitely a cultural bias toward the very gregarious leaders, the very dynamic leaders. Talkative people are not necessarily smarter, but they are many times viewed as smarter. Talkative people, extroverted people are not necessarily more attractive, but they're seen as more attractive or rated as more attractive and more interesting than their introverted friends. We just really like that, and I probably could talk about why our culture, values that so much. It's funny. In this particular personality test, it looks at 4 different things, the introversion, extroversion being one of them. In each of these 4 categories, there's the dominant, more powerful characteristics than the maybe weaker is not a great word, but the less dominant. And I fall into the less dominant for every single category. And so that puts me at a disadvantage in our culture because, the traits that I have are not typically seen as, great or as, important as those of a person who had a literally different personality type. As I said a few minutes ago, we have to be aware of how our own temperament interacts with the child's temperament. And this is something that I learn daily dealing with my middle child, who is 11, not preschool age, but again, she was preschool age at one point, and I did work in the preschool classroom. And the more I could understand her and understand, personality type, the better I can interact with her, the more fun we can have together, the more efficient or effective discipline may be. I better know how to treat her or to reward her and things like that. So a developmentally appropriate environment must be responsive to the needs of all children. Okay, so actually, we won't say that yet. It's responsive to the needs of all children, not just those very gregarious, expressive types. And we have to, as the teachers, as the early child care professionals, have to set the stage so that both temperaments can thrive and really, really, really do well. All right. Some activities for the extroverted child, some things that they are going to really thrive on in your classroom. We're going to make this a little bit more practical right here, and then I think we're going to get more back into what all this means in a second. But the extroverted child is going to love doing puppet shows and skits and plays, getting a microphone and singing in front of a group. They're going to love building things. They're going to love arts and crafts. They're going to love team games. I hate team games. I hate being put in front of people like that. Even to this day, it just really, when I'm at a party, a work party or something like that, and games come up, I just pray, please don't let them pick me. Please don't let them pick me. That's just part of who I am. They're going to love things like picnics, lots of physical activity like trampolines. And, this is not to say that, those people who are more introverted are never going to enjoy these things. But typically, these are good activities that extroverted kids are really going to really enjoy. Situations that inhibit the extroverted child is too much time alone. They don't want time to themselves. They don't want objections to their ideas, and they don't want routine. They're a lot of times more spontaneous. They're high energy. They like partnerships. They like interactive play. They like performing. And they don't self-entertain very well. My youngest daughter, who is 9 now at the point of this recording, she is definitely the most introverted of the three of them, and she's the one who, even as a toddler, I would find in her room just playing by herself instead of, following me around or trying to play with an older sister. And she did some of that, but she was the one who would, pull herself aside when she just needed time to herself. All right, so activities for the introverted child. Sorry, my phone just rang. I apologize for that. I just turned it off. But activities for the introverted child, things like journaling, dramatic play. Oh. All right, I'm sorry. I had to take a break there. We are, sorry, my husband called. We're in the middle of moving right now, and we had something we had to take care of there. So I believe this is where I stopped a second ago. We want to be sure that we are really supporting the introverted child here. I may be a little bit biased towards introverted people because I am one myself, and I certainly don't mean this to take away, us understanding extroverted kids as well. It just seems like because our society is the way it is, we don't know or understand, the introverted child as much. But different activities that they may like would be like journaling, giving them a notebook and letting them, if they're, enjoying writing letters, let them do that. If they enjoy scribbling, let them do that. If they, want to draw something, let them do that. Now, remember where they are developmentally here. So when I say journaling, I don't mean, dear diary, let me tell you about my day, and, them, writing things out like that. But just give them that time to have, to write, the way a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old writes. Dramatic play, and, this dramatic play may look different than it does for an extroverted child. For an extroverted child, this may look like, getting up and doing a big play in front of people. For the introverted child, it might mean sitting down and, holding a baby doll and loving on a baby doll. That's dramatic play. Painting, drawing, working with clay, reading. It's funny, out of the 3 of my children, the one who really enjoys reading is the introvert. Puzzles, computers, although we do want to, limit the use of the screen in the classroom. Also, I think this last one is pretty interesting, pursuing a single subject in depth. The child is going to have different things they're interested in, and they're going to want to explore those and learn a lot about them and just, become an expert on different things, and let them do it. Don't, force them to move on to the next, topic just because it's the next topic, but let them really enjoy things. If they really enjoy learning about dinosaurs or clouds or I'm trying to think, different varieties of pumpkins or something. I just made that one up. Let them go to town and explore that and look at books and, cut open pumpkins and draw pictures of clouds and, talk about dinosaur teeth, whatever. Let them do that. Some things that can inhibit or not be good for the introverted child is any activity that is just overstimulating. Noise, crowds, oh my goodness, these things just even thinking about these things, make my heart start, racing, because it's so unpleasant for me. I'm married into an extroverted family, and It just flat wears me out. It's overstimulating. I actually also don't like shopping at all, and I think a lot of that has to do with my introversion, just because the noise and the clouds and all the time I'm around other people, it's just exhausting for me. The other thing we want to point out here is we don't want to move kids from one activity to, or introverted kids, or really any kid, from one activity to another activity very, very quickly. Because remember, we're wanting them to pursue a single subject in depth. We're wanting them to, really focus on whatever they want to focus on. But when we change from one activity to the other, they're not getting to do that. They're very sensitive to constant or rapid changes. So we want to slow down and meet the needs of the child there. Now, the beauty of a developmentally appropriate classroom is the introverted child isn't being forced to, go from activity to activity to activity, and the extroverted child isn't being told they have to sit in the, reading corner for 15 or 20 minutes, or, being made to sit down for 30 minutes and do some type of art thing. They can do what they want to do, based on, where their personality falls in this area. Just a plug for letting the kids have a lot of freedom in the classroom and not telling them where they have to go and how long they can stay. That's just not good for children here. So supporting the introverted child here. Don't force them to interact. Introverts tend to observe a situation before they jump in. I mentioned the child who stands, in the doorway for half an hour before he comes in, and I'm actually thinking about one child in particular that was in my classroom. He literally every day, maybe not for 30 minutes, but probably for a good 5 or 10 minutes every day, would just stand there in the door and just look around. And I thought that was kind of strange, but now that I'm looking back on it, he was just being himself and trying to get confidence before he went into the classroom. He was really trying to understand the environment and the people around him. Okay, don't embarrass them, either intentionally or unintentionally. Whoops, I changed the slide too quickly there. It doesn't take a whole lot to embarrass an introverted child. Even good attention a lot of times can embarrass them. So, if you have to, talk to them if they've done something and need a, certain amount of discipline, talk to them privately. If they've done something really fantastic, don't make a huge deal out of it. It's going to embarrass them. Be very, very thoughtful as to how you interact with them. Also, don't overstimulate them. They do tend to be very sensitive and become overwhelmed by lots of chaos and sound and activity. So sitting an introverted child in the middle of chaos, or pairing them with a crazy kid, a very rowdy child, is awful for that child. And I think that teachers a lot of times, particularly in kindergarten and first grade, although I know y'all are with kids younger than that, try to pair the more what's seen as more well-behaved children, who are a lot of times are introverts, with the rowdy children, in order to kind of rein that rowdy child in. It's making that introverted child miserable. I know because I was that child, and I know because my own children have been paired with these kids in the classroom, and it's just they hate it. It's not really worth punishing, one child because the other child is, just being himself. Don't rush them. Most introverted kids are very slow and methodical. I think that goes with the last point about letting them really search a subject in depth here. They're slow and they're methodical because they're really getting to understand something here. If they're making a craft, they're going to make a craft. They're going to do something just really, really fantastic. There's going to be a lot of thinking and a lot of learning goes into it. If they're reading, they're going to get absorbed in the story. And when you rush them, they're going to start feeling overwhelmed and discombobulated. They need warning that things are about to change, because transition is something you have to do in the classroom. You can't let the child have, complete freedom all day long, because you are going to have maybe a 10-minute group time at some point, and the kids are going to have to eat and take a nap and all of that. So I get, the structure in the classroom, but, as much as you can, give them that freedom that they have, that you can, so that they can Be slow and methodical in their reading, in their creating, and all of that. And don't discipline them. I think I mentioned this when I talked about embarrassing them, but don't discipline them in front of others. One sure way to mortify a child is to discipline him in front of others. I would say same for adults. I do not like being shamed, I guess, in front of other people. And it's not so much that I don't like correction, although that's part of it. It's that it's embarrassing. It's mortifying, and I just don't want I don't want kids to feel that way. We need to look at the individual kids and the individual child's needs. Now, saying that, you have a classroom full of 10 or 12 or 14, different personalities, and that's hard to do. I realize that, but we do need to work on that. Don't put them on the spot. Give them time to think. Don't be overzealous. Enthusiastic teaching is really, really great, but sometimes it can be too much for an introverted child. So, try to temper that in, particularly when you're working with that child. Remember, they don't want to be embarrassed, and that overzealousness in teaching can lead to some unintended embarrassment there. And then also don't talk for them. Now, I know that this is hard too. Even though I am an introverted person, sometimes I'm also an impatient person at times. And when I would be talking to kids and they'd be very, very slow to give me an answer, I would just want to stop them and just talk for them. You give them the words. And when you're dealing with a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old, they're probably going to actually have the words. And when you speak for them, you're robbing them of their voice. Okay, the thing that that's hard for society to see anyway, you're taking it from them even more. You're stealing their opportunity to develop that particular strength. All right, so finding out the child's temperament here. This can be kind of hard to do with super young kids, although not impossible. I think if you talk to most moms or teachers of young babies, they're going to be able to talk about the child's personality. Watch what they like to do. Do they like to go and take toys out of their friends' hands as infants, or do they like to crawl over and chew on a book in the corner of the room? And as they get older and you figure it out, you'll go back and you'll think, when he was 4 months old, he did this. Or when she was 6 months old, she did this. And it's going to add up in the end. You're going to, as they turn to be 2 and 3 and 4 years old and you figure out their temperament, you're going to see signs of it from earlier on. So when we're trying to figure out children's temperament, ask them questions and look for things like this. Ask them, do you prefer to be in large groups, or do you really prefer to be with, 1 or 2 friends? And that may help you structure your teaching time in the classroom. We don't endorse, long circle times, but if you've got a lot of kids in your classroom that, really prefer 1 or 2 or 3 people, maybe small groups is a good time to get together if you're trying to teach some type of skill or introduce some type of skill or something like that. Ask them a question like, when you're tired, do you want to be alone to rest, or do you want to play with your friends? I think that's just a very telling question there. And then ask him how things make you feel. We also need to try to link together cause and effect for them. For instance, when we can link together a child's hunger and their tiredness, or their hunger and their tiredness to bad moods, they're going to understand how they work better. So now what? We need to stop setting social standards to what is normal. When I was getting ready for this, I just thought this was so interesting. We expect kids to have tons and tons and tons of friends. At least friends with all the girls in their classroom or all the boys in their classroom or something like that. But we as adults usually have 1 or 2 good friends, maybe 3 if we're lucky. And no one thinks a thing about it. I mean, we have lots of acquaintances and people we enjoy and get along with, but as far as, good, kindred spirit friends, we don't usually have that many. So we need to understand that a child or 2 children who just really enjoy each other and don't want to, extend out a whole lot, that's not abnormal. It's normal. Now we may need to help them learn how to interact with other people, at some level, but don't push them to be best friends with a child that they just don't need to be best friends with. And I know this is hard. I would even say don't expect parents to invite the entire class to birthday parties. Don't expect it and don't suggest it. I know that I don't think my girls' teachers have ever done that, but I've had friends whose parents, the policy was if you have a birthday party, you invite every kid in the class. Well, okay, if you're inviting every kid in the class and your child only really is comfortable around 2 people, you're not really giving your child a fun experience there. So, really think about, things like that. Build quiet time into each day. There's so much chaos in the classroom, and the extroverted kids a lot of times will thrive on that. So, and introverted kids can hopefully in that time find a quiet space. But, do build a quiet time into the day so that they don't have to be searching for it all the time. I would say also we need to design classrooms so that there are lots of good nooks and crannies. We should be getting away from the school design that students have to be, jostling together. I'm reading a quote here, jostling together in one gigantic mass of humanity. There are lots of students that just don't thrive like that. Give them a place where they can be alone and unseen, and give them over to like noise. So I know in the classroom in the public schools, and I'm seeing it trickle down to younger and younger kids, and I do see it in the classroom sometimes. We put kids in pods. We want them to sit in their little chairs with their little groups of people. And I think that the point of this is teamwork and working together, and that's all fine and good and everything, but it's not always great for those people who just really need that time. That can be a very painful experience. Give them that time where they can be by themselves. Maximize choice in the classroom. Don't make children rotate centers every 15 minutes. And y'all, I see this all the time. And I think the intent behind this is good. We're wanting kids to be well-rounded and to enjoy everything, and to give every kid in the classroom the opportunity to go every center. I think the intent is good, but the reality of this is that first of all, it takes the average child, I forgot the number exactly, but it was something like 45 or 50 minutes to get actively involved in an activity. And so when you're rotating them every 15 minutes, no child at all in the classroom is going to have the opportunity to get actively involved in an activity. They're not going to have that time to develop those skills to learn about clouds or dinosaurs or pumpkins. They're just not going to have that opportunity. So we really, really want to advise teachers to set up their classroom environment, the time, their schedule, so that kids can have larger chunks of time to stay, and that you don't tell the kids where they have to go all the time. Let them have that choice. It helps them to develop independence. It helps them to develop, those skills that really may be the very beginning of, doctors one day, or attorneys, or airplane pilots, and things like that. They need that time to devote to that. And for the kids, again, who are extroverted and don't want to sit in one place for more than 4 minutes because they want to be out and about and trying new things, it gives them the freedom to bounce from center to center and get what they need as well. We need to let these kids be themselves as much as we can. Allow the children to pick the right amount of stimulation that's right for them. We need to reduce group work. If children are really not enjoying it, don't make them do it, or have different options for the kids who really do enjoy working together and the kids who don't. I can't think of a single activity that you would do in a group that the child couldn't do by himself or with maybe another person. So do that. And then deliberate practice. What I mean by this is what makes people into experts makes people into superstar performers is usually not a question so much of huge talent, but it's a question of having been engaged in something for, hours and hours and hours. People who are very deliberate and they want to learn a certain craft or trade or something like that. This isn't so much about early childhood, but I'll tell you, for me in the high school, or junior high and high school, 100 years ago, I played the clarinet in the junior high school band, and I was good. I ended up being good, and it wasn't so much that I had good talent, but it was that I wanted to be good, and I made that opportunity for me to sit and to practice and to get better and to concentrate and to, learn from others. I don't play anything like that anymore, but my point here is, it wasn't because I was automatically great. It was because I purposefully had that time and set apart that time to get good. I always, when I think about this, I go back to a little boy I had in my class my last year teaching, and he was a quiet kid. He wasn't the one who stood in the doorway all the time, but he was a pretty quiet kid, and he always was over in the Block Center. He just wanted to build. He just wanted to build. He just wanted to build. And he may or may not be like an architect or an engineer one day, but he may be, and it could be because he had that opportunity. If he's not one of those, he's learning all types of just interesting, great things about physics and the world and the environment and all of that. All right, so anyway, that is what I have to say about this. We do have some more things that you'll have to do to complete this course. I hope that this was helpful for you. I know I had to bop out of it for a minute to take care of something else, but I hope this is interesting and that it really does spark some interest in personality and understanding ourselves better, and understanding kids better, so that we can, be more intentional in how we treat them. And this obviously is not just information for your classroom, but it's also information for you if you're a parent of a young child or an aunt of a young child, or you work in the church nursery. This, crosses all types of, groups of people here. So take it into real life, and also, use this information and share it with your colleagues, and share it with parents even. I think that it may be helpful in parenting. All right, so let me know if you have any more questions, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this course.